All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to trace a massive global economic crisis right back to its source, one single blocked waterway. We're going to break down how a shutdown at the Strait of Hormuz is sending these incredible shockwaves through every part of our world. It sounds kind of crazy, right? How can just 21 miles of water basically hold the entire global economy hostage? Well, that is the big question we're going to answer today, and we're going to follow the fallout step by step. It all starts with this one idea, a geopolitical choke point. The best way to think about it is like a major artery for global trade. And the Strait of Hormuz, it's one of the most critical arteries on the entire planet. And right now, it's completely blocked. So here's our game plan. We'll start with the choke point itself. Then we'll trace that immediate energy crisis as it just slams into Asia. From there, we'll see how that shatters the global supply chain, which then leads to inflation, and finally creates this huge fog of uncertainty over everything. Okay, so first up, let's really establish why this tiny strip of water matters so much. It all boils down to this one number, 20%. In normal times, a full 1/5 of the entire world's oil supply sails right through the Strait of Hormuz. When that suddenly stops, well, that's when the first domino falls. And that brings us to the first and honestly the most violent ripple effect, this massive energy shockwave that just immediately radiates outward. You really have to pay attention to the language here. The International Energy Agency. These guys are not known for hyperbole. So when they call this the largest supply disruption in history, it just hammers home the unbelievable scale of what we're dealing with. And boom, here's the immediate result. Brent crude, which is the global benchmark for oil, has already rocketed to $116 a barrel. But this isn't just some temporary spike. It's on a path for a record monthly jump of almost 60%. And believe it or not, the pain might just be getting started. Analysts are already running models that show oil could surge to a mind-blowing $200 a barrel if this conflict keeps going. And let's be clear, that's not a forecast, it's a serious warning. But here's the thing. This energy shock doesn't hit everyone at the same time or even in the same way. Asia is right on the front lines, feeling the impact first and feeling it the hardest. This chart does a great job of highlighting the two totally different crises that are unfolding. For Asia, which gets about 80% of its oil from the Gulf, the problem is physical and it's happening right now. Fuel shortages, factories shutting down. But for the West, the impact is more delayed and financial. First, you get inflation, then central banks start hiking interest rates, and only after all that do you get the potential for actual shortages. And this isn't just some abstract economic problem. Look at the emergency measures already being taken. South Korea is telling people not to drive. Sri Lanka is literally shutting down the country one day a week just to save fuel. India is seeing shortages of cooking gas, and the Philippines, they've declared a full-on national energy emergency. This is all happening as we speak. And you can literally watch this crisis move across the map. JP Morgan analysts call it a rolling supply disruption. It's a crisis moving westward in waves. It crashes into Asia, then it gets really bad in Africa, then Europe feels the pain, and finally it lands in the US markets. So now we get to the downstream effects. This is the moment where an energy crisis starts to transform into a full-blown crisis for manufacturing and pretty much all physical goods. Okay, here's a perfect example of a hidden dependency that connects all this. You probably don't connect the Strait of Hormuz to your smartphone, but you absolutely should. See, Qatar, a huge producer of natural gas, is stuck behind this blockade. Helium is made as a byproduct of that natural gas. And you need helium. It's absolutely essential to manufacture the semiconductor chips that power, well, everything. So just put it together. No gas from Qatar means no helium, which means no chips. And this chart right here shows you why that one connection is so dangerous. Qatar is responsible for nearly a third of the entire world's helium supply. Taking that offline is what one industry expert called a tsunami that's headed straight for the tech industry. And it is not just helium. The strait's closure has choked off the flow of petrochemicals that are vital for other huge industries. Take urea fertilizer. It comes from natural gas, and it's critical for growing enough food for the world. Its price has jumped about 50%. The basic building blocks for all plastics, polyethylene and polypropylene, are up almost 40%. These are not luxury items, these are the absolute fundamentals of our modern economy. So how does a crisis in Asian factories and Middle Eastern shipping lanes actually start showing up in your bank account? Let's connect those dots. The connection is surprisingly direct, actually. The price of diesel fuel, which is just surging right now, is a massive cost for farmers. It's what fuels their tractors, their combines, all their equipment. Then, that same pricey diesel fuels the trucks that bring the food from the farm to your local store. Every single one of those price increases gets baked right into the final price you pay at the checkout counter. And here's the painful reality for pretty much every household. You might hear that the economy is adding jobs, but the real story is the huge gap between how much wages are growing and how fast inflation is rising. When that inflation bar is towering over the wage growth bar, it means that even if you get a raise, your actual ability to buy stuff is shrinking. You're making more money, but you can afford less. And finally, let's look at what might be the single biggest problem of all. This deep, deep uncertainty that is now just clouding the entire global economic future. This quote from analysts at Barclays just captures it perfectly. Markets can deal with bad news. What they absolutely cannot handle is uncertainty. And the confusing communication around this conflict has created what they call a dense fog. And that is what's causing this wild volatility. And that brings us to our final and maybe most important thought. The Strait of Hormuz has exposed a massive vulnerability in our global system. Our whole just-in-time supply chain is built on one simple assumption, that these choke points will always be open. We now know just how fragile that assumption really is. And the question we're all left with is, which one is next?